Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and on today's video we are going to be tackling Academy's USS Indianapolis in 1 to 350th scale. Now about 2 years ago I built the USS the Sullivans, and I really enjoyed that experience, and it was the first ship that I had built in almost 2 decades. And so I kind of wanted to step up a little bit from a destroyer, and so I chose to do a cruiser. And the Indianapolis has quite an interesting history, and so I thought that this would be a fun subject to tackle. And so for this kit, I purchased 2 Eduard Photo-etch sets. I purchased a detail set, and then you also have to get a railing set, because the detail set does not come with railings. And I was quite excited for this kit. The history of the kit the history of the ship is rather infamous, being the ship that delivered the components for the atomic bombs used against Japan, and then famously being sunk in the middle of the night on its return voyage. And so I set about wanting to build this iconic ship. So basically the first thing we do here is we attach the top and lower hulls together, and there is quite a large step there, so I had to hit it with some aggressive sanding in order to get the top and lower hulls to blend in with each other. So it involved a lot of wet sanding and blending and putty to get that all nice and smooth, but I did get there. Next up, we're going to be making some modifications to the hull and the superstructure in order to accept the Photo-etch. And one of the things that I really wanted to try and do was portray the ship as she would have approximately looked on the night of her sinking. And so there's these large hatches here on the deck, the main deck. And the Eduard Photo-etch gives you the option to have these hatches open. And many of the accounts of the survivors of the Indianapolis state that one of the reasons why the ship sank so fast is because they had all of the hatches and portholes open because it was a really hot night in the South Pacific, and they were trying to, cool the ship down. So I kind of wanted to portray these open hatches on the deck here. So really I just used a drill bit to kind of drill open the hatchway there, and then use a knife to kind of carve that out. The other thing I need to do is scrape away a lot of the molded detail for the ladders and the doors, since I will be replacing these with Photo-etch components. So it's just a matter of going around and carefully removing, and then with a knife, and then sanding these areas smooth to accept the Photo-etch. Again, we also do that on the turrets as well. The Eduard Photo-etch set is quite comprehensive when it comes to adding detail to the ship, and so I highly recommend it. But now we can kind of start building some of the superstructure stuff. It's all rather straightforward. Mainly it's just usually like a couple walls that all glue together, and then a roof, things like that. And unfortunately, I wish I could show you the entire process, but this video would be like 4 hours long. I shot a lot of footage for this video, so I'll try and show you kind of highlights and key parts here, but just know that basically for every minute of footage here, there's 20 minutes that you're not seeing, just because it was pretty involved. We can start adding on some of the underneath the hull components. We got the rudder and the propeller shafts. Interestingly, the Academy kit, and this is true with a certain amount of Academy kits, is they kind of offer these multiple color components. So the hull is red, the lower hull is red, the upper hull is gray. There's components that are black, that would in theory be black, but the prop shafts wouldn't have been black. Anyways, just interesting. You can see there that I actually filled in some holes on the side of the hull, so that I could replace plastic parts with Photo-etch. And then here we're just laying down the main decks. For the most part, other than the step in the upper and lower hull, the fit here was generally really nice. The parts were relatively free of flash and defects and deformities. So for the most part, the plastic parts all held up really well, went together well, and really didn't require much work other than just getting the upper and lower hull connected. So here we're just adding a couple of different components here. So one of the things that I did want to do with this kit is have one of the aircraft hangar bays open. And what I found interesting is looking at images from the actual wreck. So once the wreck was discovered, it was remarkably good condition, partially because it's just so deep. But there's this shot in one of the videos where you can clearly see into the hangar. You can still see one of the scout planes in the hangar, and so trying to do this as a, this is how it may have appeared on the night of the sinking. I wanted to have one of the hangar bays open so you could see inside. So here you can see I'm just using some extra plastic card to build up the structure and to make that work. But what I ended up doing was 3D printing some structural components. So I designed this on a program called Tinkercad and created these archway supports that would fit into the space that I had created to kind of give this structure. Now I didn't really have any good reference pictures of what the inside of the hangar looked like. I had some images of contemporary hangars from other ships of similar size, so I just kind of had to make some inference here as to what it could look like, and so I think this is a decent approximation. But you can see these rib pieces just kind of fit in. I printed these on my Anycubic Photon M3 printer, and then here we have the one of the scout planes. So this actually, the kit comes with two styles of scout planes. It comes with the earlier war version, and then this is the later war version. I believe this is the Kingfisher, and so I needed to have the wings folded. So you can see I cut the wings off, adding the wing box to the fuselage. And then the float here, and in all fairness, this is actually a decent little airplane for 1/350 scale. It's got recessed panel lines. It's pretty well detailed here. So here I'm adding the folded wings on. I believe this was a Grumman design, so it used that famous Grumman wing fold mechanism, which is pretty neat in my opinion. But just a matter of getting these glued on. And then I had to build a little cradle for the float plane to sit on. I was able to find some decent pictures of the cradle here. So basically, the plane would sit on this cradle so they could move it around either in the hangar or out onto the deck to prepare it to put on the catapult. Plus, it helps just keep the airplane upright. So just built that out of some strips of plastic. Here we're just assembling the main turrets. I didn't opt for getting any aftermarket barrels. I did some tests and I was able to drill out the gun barrels for the plastic part, and I feel like they're adequate. They look good. If I hadn't been able to effectively drill out the gun barrels, I probably would have opted for aftermarket, even though they're quite expensive. But I was quite pleased with how these turned out. So we just got to make sure they get them all aligned. The kind of the locating pins for these weren't super deep, so it did take a little bit to get them aligned properly, but we got there. So now that all of the main plastic components are kind of ready, we can start adding the Photo-etch. So here's that open hatch I was talking about earlier. Lots of little extra Photo-etch details going onto the hull and the decks. Really kind of help elevate the detail on this kit. It really needs it. On its own, it's okay. It almost ends up looking toy-like when you're done if you don't have a good Photo-etch set for it. So I highly recommend it. And I believe there's a Ponto set that's quite also quite involved, but it's like 3 times the cost of getting the Eduard Photo-etch sets. So I think in the end it would have been superior because it also gives you resin detail for things like the anti-aircraft guns and other things like that. But if you're on a little bit more of a budget, the Eduard Photo-etch does a pretty good job. So these are the smoke dischargers that go on the aft end of the ship for creating like smoke screens and stuff. And I'm applying them to basically popsicle sticks with tape on it, so I can keep track of them. Here we're just putting some Photo-etch into the 40 millimeter gun tubs. So they'd have these racks along the inside of the gun tub where they would store clips of ammunition for the gun, kind of, ready rack type situation. So there's 2 layers, and it took a little while to get those in, but finally did. And we also get the propeller guards on the side of the ship as Photo-etch. Big improvement over the plastic parts. The nice thing about the Eduard Photo-etch is the way that they design the hatches is that you can actually design them to be open. They kind of have this threefold thing, so you can have it all the way closed, or you can have it open, and you still get detail on both sides of the door. So that's pretty nice. I chose not to open any of the doors because I didn't want to have to worry about trying to scratch build interior details inside any of those. But the Photo-etch is definitely a huge improvement. Both the ladders and the doors here you can see on the side of that deck. And so now we're just as I add Photo-etch, I can slowly start building up some of that superstructure. The Eduard Photo-etch also gives you these large plates that go on the side of the ship. I'm not quite sure what the function of this would have been on the real ship. I imagine maybe strengthening, during after its refit, but I'm not quite sure. But it's quite a lot of lovely rivet detail, multiple layers of parts that go on here, and I think it's adds a lot to the appearance of the ship here. And then it's just a matter of adding certain details in Photo-etch. So there's a lot of railings and platforms that need to be added. And my philosophy with this was really to put in the Photo-etch that I knew would be difficult to reach once I was actually doing the final assembly of the ship. But really I was trying to do as many sub-assemblies as I could to make it easier in the painting process. So here you can see we've got all the detail going onto the turret. And one of the things that I actually enjoyed with this kit that I didn't enjoy with the Sullivan's kit was doing all of the secondary and any aircraft battery. There were a lot of guns on this kit. There were 8 open mount 5-inch guns, and then there were, I believe, 6 of the quad 40 millimeter guns, and then 8 20 millimeter guns. And my experience doing these ones was much better than it was on the Sullivans. And I think mainly that's just because I didn't really know what I was doing when I was building the Sullivans, whereas this one, I now had an idea of how fiddly these parts could be. And so I was able to better adjust my workflow for doing these. And I quite enjoyed them. And it wasn't as much of a chore as I was expecting it to be to do all of these anti-aircraft guns. But the Eduard Photo-etch really adds a lot to the guns that you don't get in the plastic. Basically what you see plastic-wise, the base and the 2 guns, that's all you get for the plastic. So the Photo-etch is definitely a necessity here to really elevate the look of the secondary battery. And the 5-inch guns were similarly well detailed. So here we're building up the Catapult. Now the kit part for the Catapult is literally just like a solid chunk of plastic, and like I mentioned before, it's very toy-like. So basically the entirety of the Catapult is replaced in Photo-etch, and it's kind of a little model by itself. A lot of components, a lot of folding to do, but honestly, it was really rather straightforward. It's just a lot of straight bends and angles. So it's not like I had to do any real like curved parts or rounded parts. So in the end, it actually ended up being quite simple, or not necessarily simple, but straightforward. And the quality of the Eduard Photo-etch is such that it does a lot of your job for you. But this is a huge improvement over the kit plastic. And I mean, and you could even take this further and super detail it even more. If you look at reference pictures of these catapults, they would have big pipes and hoses and things running all over them. So you could really have some fun detailing this. So there's this platform that goes around the catapult, so we had to get that attached on, and then I got it attached to the mount, and then I ended up cutting off some of the plastic details to add to the photo etch, just to kind of help bulk it out, and then finally the cradle for the airplane that the airplane sits on. So I'm really pleased with how this turned out. Same thing with the crane. So you can see there the difference between the kit part and the photo etch. The photo etch was probably about 20 separate pieces to build that up, but it's a big improvement. These are just quick shots of a lot of the other details that I didn't want to necessarily take you through the whole process of showing how I made it, but now we can get everything under paint. And for this, I am using Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black. Because this has so much photo etch on it, I really needed a strong and robust primer on here, so that's why I chose this primer. Plus, I would be doing a lot of masking on here, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be lifting any paint up. So here you can see the aft mast with the radar. Again, huge improvement over the kit part with the photo etch. Really makes it look nice. Now I'm going to spray. There are certain components on the ship that are black, and I think for a scale effect, NATO black it's much better looking. So I did that for the tops of the funnels, and as well as the water line, the boot stripe here, and use that in the NATO black as opposed to just using the black primer color. I just think it's a better scaled down effect for black, especially on such a small scale. I think it looks much better. So next up, once we get the waterline masked, we're going to hit the lower hull with Tamiya's Hull Red. This is a really deep color, almost brown. So I think it's a good base, but not necessarily the final color. But it goes on nice, and so you can see it's like a deep reddish brown, and and essentially what I ended up doing as in terms of painting was copying what I did on the Sullivans. I really wanted them to match since they were both, late war measure 22 paint schemes. So here I'm using some Rot Brown from MIG to add some streaks and highlights. I really tried to keep this in a vertical motion on the lower hull, just to kind of add some variation to the tonality of the lower hull. I wanted it. I mean, at this point, the Indianapolis had gone through its late war refit, and had literally just came straight from dry dock to Pearl to pick up the components to deliver them, and then it was sunk. So there really wouldn't have been a lot of wear and weather at this point. The ship would have been relatively clean. So I wasn't going too extreme on this. Now we can do the deck. For this, I'm using French Blue by MIG. I really like this color for the actual deck blue color. I think it's just a good strong color, and it contrasts well against the rest of the grays that we'll be using on the ship. So I've masked off the lower hull. I'm painting the deck, and once I get the deck masked off, then I'll paint the upper hull and the superstructure. But unfortunately, I failed to record a lot of that part. But I'll show you how I mask the deck. And I actually learned this from another internet YouTuber, Studio Blue Ocean, I believe is the name of the channel, using really small squares of tape to kind of create these masks around the details on the deck. So you can see here, I'm just kind of outlining all the details with these small squares. It looks tedious, and I mean, it does take time, but it's really not as bad as it might look. And at least in my experience so far, it has been the best way to mask off and paint details like this. So really what we do is we use the small squares to kind of outline everything, and then we can go back in with larger squares to fill in, all that empty deck space here. And you will notice as I'm as I'm masking over the deck on here, that I do leave the center portion of this deck open, and that's just because there is another part of superstructure that goes on top of that deck, and I just don't need to worry about painting inside where it would cover. But just making sure that I get all of the exposed parts covered with the tape. So I think I ended up doing all of the decks over the course of about 2 days. So really not bad in terms of, time length to get these all masked up. So now once you get it all masked, you can start painting the main deck color. And I also ended up painting the dark blue on the side of the hull as well for the Measure 22 paint scheme. Unfortunately, I just did not record that process. But right now it's just a matter of going around and getting all of the vertical superstructure painted, and pretty straightforward. The color for this is light gray by MIG, I believe, and it's just a good solid color. And you got to make sure when you're doing like a lot of the photo etch that you're kind of getting every angle you can, because of all the interior space that you need to get paint on as well. So just be aware of that. Getting the secondary battery painted up. So once it's all painted, we can start removing the masking tape. And just really pleased with the way this comes out. Every now and then you'll get little areas where paint seeps under one of the little squares of masking tape, but usually it's not that much of a deal to just go in there and touch it up with a brush. Just really happy with how this turned out. I think removing the masking almost took as much time as putting the masking on, because you just got to make sure you get all these little squares up, and you don't want to, you got to be careful doing it because you don't want to ruin your paint job there with your tweezers. So, just got to take your time. But I think the how it looks and the finish and the sharpness of these edges is really worth going through the trouble of getting all that masking done. So one of the things that I learned from the Sullivans was using like an enamel wash on a ship like this was really difficult for me. I ended up breaking a lot of the photo etch detail that I had put on the Sullivans trying to remove the wash. So for this one, I am using a watercolor wash. And so I mix the watercolor paint with a little bit of water, or with water and then a little bit of dish soap. And the reason why I put the dish soap in is because it helps break the surface tension and keeps it from beading up. And it really allows that wash to flow into all of the details and the crevices. And the other reason for using a watercolor wash, especially, so I did coat the entire ship in All-Clad Aqua Gloss, is just how easy it is to clean up a watercolor wash. And you don't need to use, harsh thinners. You don't need to, it really doesn't take much pressure from the cotton bud to remove the wash. And so it was much easier and much safer for me to work around a lot of the photo etch details using this type of wash. Now, it doesn't blend as well as like an enamel wash or an oil wash would, but I just found it so much easier to work with. So with the wash all cleaned up, we can matte coat everything and prep it for oils. Like I mentioned before, I wasn't going to go super heavy on the weathering on this just because it had only recently come out of dry dock. But I did want to add a little bit of salt staining and a little bit of marine growth on the hull. So for the process of the salt staining, what I'm basically doing here is flooding the hull, or the area that you're going to add the effect to, with odorless mineral spirits. You need to put a good healthy coat on, just using a large wide flat brush here. And then I'm going to use just this soft round brush and just kind of gently stipple on some white oil paint and along the tops, kind of the edge of the hull there. And then going back with our flat brush, then that's wet with thinner, we just gently pull down that white oil paint, and it'll create this great subtle streaking effect. And so I basically did this across the entire hull and a lot of the larger superstructure areas. And it's simple and it's subtle. but it just really adds some great tonal variations to what would otherwise be just large, flat sections of color. For the marine growth, I am using these green colors here. And again, I've loaded up the hull with thinner, and I'm just kind of blotting this on, trying to keep it closer to the water line. And then, yeah, blotch it on. It'll look kind of strange when you first put it on, but then what you want to do is you come back and just kind of almost blot it away. You don't want to do streaking, just kind of this blotting motion to kind of pull it back just a little bit and make it, again, like I said, subtle. So with all the painting work done, we can start assembling all of our subcomponents. And this was kind of a really fun part of the ship, because as I was painting it, I was imagining what it would look like all put together, but to start seeing it all come together was quite exciting. And to really see the structure of the ship, build up. And I remember hearing a really great tip once when building ships is to work from the inside of the ship out. So start with parts that are on the center line of the ship, and kind of build up from there, and then build out sideways. It just makes it easier when installing everything, so you're not trying to reach over things to, put something on. And maybe that's, basic common knowledge for it. For me, it was kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I need to remember to do that. Installing the main battery was fun and exciting. Lots of ladders and that need to be installed to connect a lot of these levels. And this for me, this is really where this kit starts to take on new life, as you start adding all these ladders, because the ladders really help add a sense of scale and just show you how big the ship is, and how small a person is compared to the ship. So yeah, here we got some 40 millimeter guns going on. Try to pose them in a way that looked interesting. We can get some railing going on. I know some people like to do the railing before painting. I just find that so hard to work around the railing. So I just basically paint the railing on the Photo-etch fret, install it, and then touch it up. But I think railing really adds a great deal of detail to a kit. So here we can finally install our scratch built hangar base. We got the plane in there, all painted up, and then we can fit on the actual hangar bay material there. From what I could tell, the interiors of these hangar bays were painted white. I don't know if that's necessarily true on every single ship, but at least contemporaries I saw were painted white, so it was painted white. But I really didn't do any detail painting in there. You wouldn't see anything. This is the aft mast going on just in front of the aft funnel. And really love how the Photo-etch turned out on that. So yeah, it's just kind of a matter of fitting all these pieces together and building up the superstructure. It's really neat to see all the different layers that go onto the ship. The Sullivan's was pretty simple. It only had basically like 2 or 3 upper decks, and that was about it. This has multiple layers and a lot of overlapping layers, which was really fascinating. So now we can get this installed, cover up the hangar bay there, get our main crane on. I love the look of how this turned out, and sorry you get you get part of my beard in there, but yeah, it just looks really good. It was fun getting this part installed, the catapult, and with the airplane on it, just looks really neat. I believe prior to the refit, it actually had 2 catapults, one on each side. After the refit, they found that it was no longer necessary. So here we're getting the open mount 5-inch guns installed. So there's 4 guns on 2 decks, and I believe these were dual purpose, both anti-aircraft and anti-surface. So we get the aft 40 millimeters. You can see the smoke dischargers have already been installed on the back end there. And for the stand, I went with a simple brass dry brush. Kind of makes it look old and weathered. Eventually I'll get around to actually making really nice, wooden real brass stands for these. But for now, this will work. Finally, we had to do some rigging. Now, in hindsight, I should have used thinner line for this, but essentially, I found some decent reference pictures of what the rigging looked like. So this is kind of an approximation. It's not exact, but basically you can see here I'm attaching it to the deck at the front there, running it over the yard arms on the masts, and then back down and super gluing it to the deck. I find it really useful to use like a super glue accelerant or a kicker when doing this, just to make sure that it glues down properly. But yeah, there we go. And here is the final reveal. The ship was too large to fit on my round table, so you get still pictures instead. But I'm really pleased with how this turned out. And I ended up building this kit as a buddy build with a fellow Instagrammer, Matt, at Matt's Modeling Den. I'll put his contact info in the description down below. He built the USS San Francisco. And so this was really fun to build alongside with another fellow modeler, and really pleased with how it turned out. Learned a lot. Definitely going to do a bigger ship for my next ship. Not sure if that's going to be a battleship or an aircraft carrier, but we will see. Anyways, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. If you liked the video, go ahead and hit the like button, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. And here's a quick shot of this to scale with the Sullivans. You can see how much bigger it is. Anyways, thank you, and we will see you on the next video.